really late, and being a pastry chef, I think this is what you would call dessert. This is the last course for the day. So, in confectionery is a little bit of a, even today in this country, it's a little bit of a sunrise, a greenfield kind of thing. There are not so many established players there, and from the people of you, the all of you who are like who have worked for five-star hotels and all that, there are a lot of other things in this field which I'll just put a small perspective on. All right, so this is a picture of a bakery and confectionery. Now, the various aspects of a bakery and confectionery work, when you say bakery and confectionery, what does it involve? It involves bread making, which has various processes related to bread making. Then there's laminated dough, which is what we call viennoiserie, in which you get things like croissant and Danish and stuff like that. Even things like brioche. In fact, that's a very specialized field, completely different from bread making. Then we have pastry making. Now, pastry making is what all of you will be mostly very familiar with. Your traditional pastry shops and your cake vendors and all that stuff. And then you have what we call confectionery. Now, confectionery is a word which, unfortunately, most hotels in India where we have pastry and confectionery don't do much confectionery. When you say confectionery, you should think of something like Poppins. That's what confectionery is, things like that. And so we have another one which is our chocolate work, where the process is completely different again. And then we have ice cream. Ice cream is also something which comes under the perspective of, under the umbrella of what we call pastry and bakery in India. I'm very happy to have you here. So, all of you can please interrupt at any time during this thing because we want to keep it short, and I don't want you to, keep it. I don't want to keep you for too long over here. So this is what the entire spectrum of pastry and bakery, as we say, generally comprises of. So then we will be going through certain things such as excuse me. Okay, that's where it is. Okay, so this is what I would say. This is a typical hotel confectionery or a hotel pastry and bakery where you have a prep area, a bakery area, and there is a tray wash, day store, confectionery, chocolate room, freezer, and chiller, right? So uh, again, this is what is very specific to a place which generally does everything in a very small area, and this is the kind of thing you will find in most hotels. Other areas which also applies to hotel and larger operations are a staging area where you have things where you can arrange before they are picked up by a service team, or you may have a packing and storing area where before you transport and you send it to your shops or your pastry shops if you have a distributed kind of setup. Chef, would you like to add something to this?
Unless somebody has any specific questions, no. I mean, this is like you said. It's a very general layout of an organization trying to do something, or rather everything from a very small area. But yeah, this is like it's not like the perfect, but in a small area, yes, there are shared spaces in terms of storage, washing, but otherwise, ideally, you would rather have your high risk and your low risk areas completely segregated, and and of course, you also have your the wash up area, the prep area, and the post storage, that is even before and after preparation, to be completely segregated because of various hygiene issues. But apart from that, in a hotel scenario, that is not that much of a concern because everything is going to be prepared and consumed within 24 hours at max. So yeah, I think that is good.
Right. So Now, when we are talking about pastry shops and we're talking about pastry and confectionery production areas, bakery production areas, so a lot of what goes into that depends on what kind of operation are you servicing. So the kind of operations that a bakery or pastry can service, some of the options are here. For example, you may have a standalone pastry shop, you may have a hotel or restaurant pastry shop, you may have a standalone production unit for airline catering or for a set of pastry shops. You may have a high-end thing or something which is geared towards a high-end customer, or which is more geared towards a mass market customer. So the results of your pastry and bakery, the design of your pastry and bakery, your equipment selection, and of course everything else will change according to what are you actually servicing. Because remember that we are not making a pastry bakery just for the sake of making one. We are obviously trying to service a front end, and that plus the scale at which you want to operate and how distributed is your operation. So even for example, your hospital may have this, and then you have these local bakery shops like what you have on the road in your neighborhood or something. Especially in South India, it's very common where you have what is called a bakery, but actually it's a mini kirana store which just sells some, savories. So that is also a different kind of operation. The Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so bakery and confectionery temperature zones. So typically you have the bakery at something like 24 to 27 degrees, which is where your actually baking happens. That's your oven room and things. Then you have the preparation area, which is at around 24 degrees. Your the area which is here, which is your chocolate room, is the one which is at 18 degrees Celsius, and then you have a confection area which is maintained between 18 to 22 degrees Celsius. Uh, so some of the questions which I would have thought that we already discussed earlier was that what are the temperatures which are good for operation? 18 to 20 degrees is pretty normal in any cold kitchen. Chef, would you like to elaborate on any of this?
Um, no, it's all stated very clearly, unless somebody has something in their mind. Yeah, it is slightly difficult to maintain these temperatures in tropical locations like ours. But yes, it's possible. Of course, there's a cost involved. Um, these temperatures are much easier to maintain in higher up in the latitudes. But here it's not, unless in a hotel scenario, of course, it's very easy. In a standalone, it is slightly more difficult because hotel is completely HVAC, and there's a temperature and humidity control throughout the facility. In standalone, yes, it is a bit of a challenge, but it's possible. And ideally, yes, that is what you would like to have. A cold kitchen should be at around 18 to 20 degrees. And then whatever you prepare is done at that temperature. And so the pull down time to go down to 4 or 5 degrees, or actually below 8 degrees, is reduced. And of course, the possibility of contamination in a high risk bakery, that is confectionery, where you're not going to really cook anything after you've touched it or processed it. So that also goes down, because that temperature is like at the limit of comfort for the operator, and it's very close to the 8 or 10 degree cutoff where you need to store the products.
What
Yeah.
is the right temperature of serving a pastry or eating a pastry in a shop, or say, often we observe that these are kept in a normal chillers.
Not at all. That's like absolutely unacceptable. Normally, like you're saying, that it is. Where have you observed this?
General confectionery or pastry shops has
Yeah, so
Yeah, the display cabinets, if it is inside the display cabinet, it has to be below 8 degrees, at least 8 degrees.
generally chillers operate on 4 degrees or less
Right,
than.
I'm saying that's like the max can be 8, because it's going to be opened, closed, you're going to be servicing it. So yeah, In a cold room situation, maintaining a 4 degrees is it's a no-brainer. But if it's in a glass display cabinet and you're going to keep on opening it, closing it, also depends on the frequency of how much you're using it.
So my take is that 4 degrees is okay to keep pastry.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's safe. It's safe for at least 24 hours minimum.
It doesn't impact the texture or
No, then you also have to make sure that your cabinet and display and everything has a humidity control. If it's going to be very, very dry and there's no humidity control, your pastries and whatever is going to be there inside is going to dehydrate it. So, because at this temperature, if it is not, the humidity control is not monitored, your air, the level of humidity is very, very low because it's continuously getting cooled and the moisture is getting extracted from that immediate area or that cold display cabinet or whatever. So yes, your product that is going to lie inside that is going to get dehydrated if you do not monitor or you don't have the facility of maintaining the right humidity.
Because what you're mentioning, where it's kept in a non-refrigerated cabinet, depends on a couple of things. First is what kind of pastry is it? Many of the things that you see on the road are actually basically a dry cake with a buttercream frosting. In which case, the buttercream is not really butter; it's made out of some kind of vegetable fat, which does not melt at high temperatures. Therefore, the shelf life exists for it to stay without any refrigeration. For example, if you take something like a brownie, it does have a shelf life outside the fridge. But when you say a pastry which contains cream or which contains dairy product, genuine dairy product, naturally made, that kind of thing requires refrigeration if you want to keep it for any length of time. As chef mentioned, your display cabinet must have a humidity control unless you want things to become very dry inside. Uh, so modern cabinets which you can buy today maintain a humidity control. If you buy one locally fabricated, you may not have that option, but good ones do have this. I believe, I'm not really sure of this, but I believe it's in the region of 80% or something, RH.
Yeah, 80% is fine. It doesn't, I mean, you're pretty okay with 80%.
Actually, I was asking this question, what is the humidity, which Ajay asked. But 80% of humidity, can be maintained with the refrigeration system also, if it's a correct design.
That's right.
No
These
need
are
to add
refrigeration
water
systems.
because adding water is dangerous.
No, these are not non-refrigerated systems. These are refrigerated cabinets with the humidity control option already there. Was that the question you were asking?
No. I was, giving an information after this question that if it's a 80% RH, that can be maintained with a well-designed refrigeration equipment.
Okay, so but in this case, whenever that is possible, but we actually, the equipment vendor specifies what is the humidity control, and there is a gauge to monitor the humidity control in this. So if in case any of you wants to put a shop and keep your pastries for a long time, you may have to be sure that your unit is actually delivering what the vendor promised.
Just to add that, a couple of things for pastry. One is the temperature, 4 degree, RH, just confirm 85%. Then the velocity of the air inside the cabinet has to be very, very slow. Otherwise, it will dry up
You are right. The air velocity is also important, and most of them now they are static units and they are ventilated units. So static units will also result in more less drying of your pastry.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the static unit, the temperature around the cabinet is not uniform. On surfaces, it will be low. Inside, it will be less.
There are trade-offs, but the end of the actual the basically what practically what happens is that when we use these cabinets which are with humidity control and everything, the result is fantastic. If you put two of them next to each other, where one unit is without this humidity control and one of them is like a proper one which has a humidity control option, the difference is visible in just a few hours. For example, if you have a fruit on top of a pastry, the fruit will be dry on the other one. It will just shrivel like a kishmish, but this one will not. It will be nice and fresh like it was just made a few hours back. That's very important, and that's I think what Chef is also talking about. Uh, so that's about temperature for display and storage, right? Now, even for not for extended periods of time, but for let's say an outlet which operates for 12 hours and its opening hours is just say 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. Even 8 degrees in the display cabinet is just fine. And as for what temperature that you should serve pastry at, it really depends on the kind of pastries. Some pastries are meant to be had cold, some of them are supposed to be had at room temperature, but still storage is at this refrigerator temperature only.
What are the challenges for the deli carts and kind of operation where you have bakery products and cold cuts, meats and all, from storage point of view and serving point of view?
See, chef, would you like to take this?
No, can you just be elaborate, more specific?
Challenges, for a deli carts and operation where you combine a bakery product along with a cold cut or a meat.
You don't do that. You have to have separate cabinets. You have to have a segregation. Number one, you can't be storing your meats along with your pastries in the same.
Prepared food stuff storage, not raw materials.
No, even the prepared ones, you'd never do cold meats and cheeses. Cheeses is still fine, but you in India you just can't. Nobody's going to touch a pastry then if they are not non-vegetarians. That is, they're vegetarians. There might be a lot of vegetarians who will eat egg, but they will not use or pick it up if they see that you're going to store cold meats in the same sort of how do I call it airspace, cooled airspace, and that's a very sort of restricted space where the air is circulating, and it's like there is danger of cross contamination. It is going to happen, and forget about cross contamination. There are other issues of religion and faith and everything. So you don't do that.
Sorry, I think I didn't frame my question properly.
Right.
In a deli carts and operation, like you sell these krosna bits and all, with salmon and with cold cuts. And so what are the challenges as far as the storage of the prepared food stuff is concerned? Are there any issues in terms of the temperature and the humidity? Because you have bakery products, you have breads, you have meats, you have...
So you're talking about prepared sandwiches and savories.
Ready to sell.
Sandwiches. Or see, the breads, it depends what sort of bread it is. There are some breads which can be kept at ambient. There are some breads which need to be in a controlled environment. And then if you're doing sandwiches, then you have to treat it like any other meat or high protein product. So you have to control and monitor the temperature. And if you're going to package a sandwich, then you're safe with the dehydration point of view. But otherwise, the temperature, you have to have it at around 4 degrees. That's just the storage. And then you have a limited shelf life because, like I said, there's high protein product, and it's got protein, it's got carbs, it's got sugar, it's got moisture, it's got everything that bacteria needs to thrive. So so you need to have to be as careful as dairy products, or even more so, because the bacteria has got everything that it needs to thrive. Only thing which is missing is the temperature, which you are controlling. Everything else is right there. You mess around with the temperature, you have a problem.
So actually, see, the one very easy way, or actually not easy, I mean, you should not take a risk at any time, but supposing you're combining 4 different products with different shelf life and storage conditions, you take the product which is the most risky and which has the most critical storage requirement. For example, if you make a ham sandwich in croissant, now your croissant can survive in ambient temperature, but your ham slice can't. So say your ham slice needs a temperature of 4 degrees and your shelf life for the ham is say 2 days. You could effectively, in theory, make a ham and croissant sandwich which will last for 3 days at 4 degrees or 2 days at 4 degrees, which is the temperature, which is the shelf life of the lowest.
But does that adversely affect the bread component in that?
Well, it does not affect that much because you are making a sandwich, and if say you are looking at a deli environment where you already have prepared sandwiches as opposed to something like say Subway where you are preparing a freshly baked bread with freshly cut ingredients, then it's a different matter. But if you are making a takeaway sandwich ready to go, it's not going to affect and there are ways to work around that. For example, you could, if you have a liquid filling or a semi-liquid filling which is going to make your sandwich soggy, you could have something in between which is like a barrier. In the case of a simple sandwich, it could just be butter spread on the bread loaf, bread slice. In the case of a ham sandwich, it could be a bit of lettuce. So there are enough ways around it, and challenges when you combine them both are already very clearly explained by chef, because this is the environment we operate in. Maybe if you were in say Thailand, nobody will care whether it's veg or non-veg next to each other, or it's pork or beef or whatever it is. But here, for example, people will actually be extremely suspicious if they see you, I'm sure all of you have faced that in real life.
So you suggest the ideal transportation temperature is also around 4 degrees?
Absolutely, absolutely. So whether it is being transported or not, or kept, or the cold chain has to be maintained. That is the key word, the cold chain. So the cold chain is till the time the product is consumed, not just even served to the customer. And if the customer is going to take it away, you have to make sure that he understands, or it's labeled very clearly that it needs to be refrigerated. And once it's out of the refrigeration, may be consumed in the next 60 minutes or 90 minutes, and that's just the limit. And after that, you are absolved of the responsibility if you're stating it very clearly on your packaging. So if the customer chooses to have it after 4 hours or 5 hours, well.
Just adding a point to your query, okay. With the confectionery product and the delicacy, I think I'm audible. With the confectionery product and the delicacy, what we are talking about, confectionery product has got a tendency to absorb the smell of the delicacy very, very easily. They are very delicate. In case of a freshly made, freshly cakes or a freshly baked muffin or whatever it is, when they are fresh, when you keep it in a sandwich, though they may form the same category of a baked product, the smell of the smoke smell of the ham or smoked salmon or even a chicken breast, you might be using some herbs in that. It's quite it gets affected very fast. So that's one of the reasons that though the temperature is almost same, 4 to 8 is something which you produce, which you maintain for both confectionery and also a delicacy product or a sandwich. But it's very essential to store it separately, and the packing is very, very important for a ready-made sandwich. As you said, once it is baked, breads get sealed. If it is not rightly packed and sealed, that is what I.
Thank you for that information. So when we come to actually designing a place, a pastry or bakery or something, these are the constraints that we have all the time, which are space, the kind of labor that you have, local availability of machinery. This is a big question which all of us come across sometime, whether to buy imported equipment or to go with locally made equipment. And then there's of course money, which is the capital requirement for actually making a bakery. Shay, would you like to expand this a bit?
Self-explanatory. I mean, if you try to open something, all of these will be like popping up, and yeah, I mean, this is basically it's about planning and budgeting. That's it, really. If you got the budget for whatever, you go ahead and do that. And space is again a function of money. Availability, there's actually nowadays there's no dearth of availability if you have the money, but then you have to be careful of what you're getting, because you need to be sure of whether it can be serviced post, actually buying the equipment and when you start running it. It's in a commercial equipment, and any downtime, the downtime is really going to be key in any sort of a commercial equipment. If you're going to have an oven which is going to shut down for 2 days, let's say in a month, you've had it. You might as well do with something which is locally made, not as efficient, but it is always up and running. So yeah, so all of those things, it's very difficult to elaborate. This is a very general outlook on what is it that can lead to the final design and the product that we will be able to churn out. Yeah.
Especially, I would like to add that for people who have experience with hotel design, the most expensive or the best equipment, for example, if you buy an oven, hotels can cope with shutdowns of a day. They buy from outside, they can outsource things. Waiting for a spare part, they can. But actually, in a commercial establishment, standalone bakery and all that, not having the oven working or not having the mixer working means that you can't do any production. And it means that you are out of business for those 2 days or those 3 days. That's another perspective which is also very valid if you're not a hotel bakery. Okay, the day store is basically your temporary storage area. It's not much to talk about there. Then you have the dough preparation area. So, if all of you can, the dough preparation area, when we specifically talk about, this is where you mix the doughs and all that. The next step is you have the proofing section. In the proofing section, after you prepare the dough, you have what is called an intermediate proofing. After that, you give a shape to the bread. Giving a shape to the bread requires machines, or you can do it by hand, and then you go to what is called the final proofing, and then followed by baking. So this is the very simplified version of the process. And then you have after baking, you have cooling, and you have slicing, packing, or followed by storage or shipping out. Okay, so that's for the bakery, for the baking part of the bakery and confectionery. And then for the confectionery part, in a hotel kitchen, generally with equipment in a limited space and limited separation, you also mix pastry batters and pastry mixtures using machines which are sometimes common. For example, it may be a planetary mixer you're using for both, and generally the areas are common. Now, as Chef had mentioned earlier, you need to separate certain processes which are dependent on temperature and depending on the kind of product being used. For example, bread work generally involves the use of yeast, whereas pastry involves the use of eggs and yeast and sugar, which you should not mix. Whenever you have a similar kind of setup here, like for example this one, there is a risk of cross contamination. So that's something which means that these processes should be physically separate spaces with separate temperature zones. Okay. Right, so one of the things that you can see here is that the ovens here have a hood on top. So the hood actually is that square box on top of the oven, and now many of the ovens which are sold these days don't require any hood on top because they just have a vapor exhaust, and if it's an LPG oven, they have a flue gas connection. The flue gas is generally where your burnt gas goes out and you can put a chimney for it to be exhausted outside the building. But the major part of the oven's heat, which comes from the steam and all generated inside the oven, can be connected directly into your ventilation system without the need of any duct. Plus, the oven doors generally have an extraction fan on top of the oven. It's like a canopy, a built-in hood, a small one, and that also can connect directly to the hood. So what this benefits you is that you don't have a huge amount of air moving into a duct all the time, but because the fan actually switches on when required. Okay, so this is also about energy efficiency, which is a very high cost in a bakery, which is already an expensive proposition to set up.
Could I react on this, please?
Beg your pardon?
We see more and more designs where the exhaust hood above the oven is taken away, which is often a good decision because you, as you say, can save energy. In some situations, we advise to put an exhaust hood above an oven because of the following, and even put in filters. Because in some ovens, the yeast gets into the exhaust air, and when it's in the air, it's very highly flammable. So some countries, even it's an 80x rating, because it's so easily flammable, you have to take it out, and then we advise to put in filters to take the yeast particles out, because of fire issues.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay. The tray wash is another area which is actually, it appears to be quite simple, but if you're operating a large bakery, you might be doing like 600-700 trays a day for products that you bake. And in that particular setup, there are certain other options which you can consider. One of them is the utensil washer, which actually, for example, the utensil washer, it uses 12 liters per wash cycle. as opposed to something like manual washing where you have a continuously on water tap running all the time, 5 liters a minute, that kind of scenario. And then you have a tray cleaner where there is actually no water used. This is like a dry brush system, and the tray comes out actually greased, already ready to use. So that's another option which is available for people who want to use. So then we come to the confectionery section. Now the confectionery section is really complex, and this is not really something which is, as far as process is concerned, bread work is a simple process, very well documented, very well understood by most equipment manufacturers. They offer complete lines where you just put in flour from one side and you get bread on the other side. But that's not the case for confectionery, because confectionery is extremely diverse. The kind of things you can make in confectionery are not, it's only limited by imagination, and therefore unaffordable if you want a machine to do it. So this is pretty much, I'm not going to talk much about it. Chef, would you like to say something?
No, that's okay. I mean, like it's like you said, it's basically more dependent on the skill of the person or the chef who's working there.
Yes.
So he has to have some very very basic things. He has to have the space, the ambient temperature, and adequate refrigeration and work tools, which, like in this case, it's being shared. The dough mixers are being shared. The storage is being shared. But apart from that, there's it just needs to be a clean, nice, workable workspace, and that's it really. And it also depends on the design of the design depends on what is it that what are the list of products that you're going to be doing.
Okay.
If there are any specific requirements, you have that equipment. Like if you want to do pulled sugar, you're going to have that sugar lamp and everything. But otherwise, you don't doing it, you're not doing it. Otherwise, you just need some work stables, maybe a dough sheeter, which can be used for doing not just. Again, it needs to be separate. In this case, definitely a dough sheeter needs to be separate because that cannot be sanitized.
Yeah.
Because it's got a porous bed. But apart from that, yeah, it's just a nice clean space.
So this is a very interesting point which I should have mentioned, but I just remembered that actually to operate a bakery and confectionery, you just actually, to be on a very simple scale, you just need an oven. I mean, if you look at it, there are bread factories which operate in which do even 6,000-7,000 loaves a day of bread, and the only equipment they have is an oven. They have molds obviously to break the bread in, and they have like the old weighing scale with weight on one side and tarazu, that kind of weighing scale, not even a digital one. So they do a very high amount of volume. They have a slicing machine. From that scale, there is no limit to the amount of complexity that you can probably put into this operation, and of course that depends on whether you will make money at the end of it. Of course, all of these are labor-saving devices. If a factory operates like that, it's going to have a lot of people working there who are going to be manually cutting the bread, manually shaping the bread, and all that stuff. So, and this other part about this is the cold store. The cold store, at least for me, a cold store is something which I find many hotel designs. I know there are a lot of hotel designers here. The cold store is always undersized, because while this small space can turn out almost an unlimited amount of products, the kind of products it turns out increases exponentially if the cold store is very large in size. That's how it works. It's like there's a saying that the pastry chef's best friend is his freezer. So it's like that. So for example, any process in making in making cakes, pastry these days requires the use of a freezer. Even a blast freezer is much more beneficial to use. So that's something which limits your scale or provides you with the ability to scale up based on. And if you go for a slightly higher size freezer and cold room combination, you'll have that flexibility. Tomorrow, if you are under a lot of pressure with additional load, you'll be able to handle it. Of course, you can also hire these, but that's just an example.
Which of these, freezer or chiller, which should be bigger?
Generally, when you have a pastry and you are producing, say, I'll explain this better with an example. Let's say you have two people working, right? And your two people are able to produce 80 cakes in a shift, right? But your 80 cakes, maybe your order is for 3,000 cakes. So where do you store it? If you if you say that you want to make 3,000 cakes, then it will take you like say a month to make them, and that during that month you obviously cannot store it in a chiller. You have to store it in a freezer, because the shelf life that a freezer offers with a properly controlled hygienic production process is basically unlimited. For example, if you buy an ice cream today in the market, it has a shelf life of 6 months to a year, depends on the brand, and whether it's ice cream or it's actually frozen dessert. So that shows you that these you can actually stock up in the freezer, not in the chiller. Your chiller is where things which are work in progress go, and your things which are like semi-finished or almost completely finished go inside your freezer. And then comes your process of finishing and picking it up, which is where you take it out of the freezer, bring it to serving temperature and all that, and serve it. Does that answer your question?
I was trying to understand, say, for a hotel,
Yeah.
what is the ratio of a chiller to freezer?
There is no such ratio. It depends on the complexity of your menu.
In your hotel, how do you
In my hotel, it's really, really small. I feel it's really undersized. No, actually, the freezer is really undersized. The cold room is. So, in my hotel, I have 14 cold rooms and chillers. But remember that as far as energy consumption goes and all that, a chiller which is double the size doesn't consume double the power or double the energy. It just provides you with that additional flexibility. And the second thing is the to maintain the efficiency of the chiller and to have certain hygiene criteria met, you cannot overload this chiller. So yeah, there is no ratio which I can tell you, but it's very easy to calculate that if you are in a situation where you know your production, you know your requirement to be doing, you will know how short you are. For example, if you can store 100 cakes and you have an order of 500 cakes, then that is your 400 short. So that's what you will help you to decide.
Comment. If you have a glass freezer,
Yes.
you can work with a smaller, you can expand your freezer capacity because you freeze and put inside. So even if you have a smaller freezer, if you're stuck with a smaller freezer, you need a bad freezer.
Yeah, but we are not talking about the. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But we are talking about the physical volume of space available to store products.
What I'm trying to say is, if your incoming product is not at 4 degrees, but at minus 20, in the same freezer you can store more.
So you're talking about pull down time here and all that stuff. Yeah, but then ultimately, yeah, you're right that your pull down time will go down. Your temperature will not fluctuate so much when you load your freezer, but you ultimately need physical space to stock it. So yes, you are right. But when you talk about limiting production capacity in terms of how much you can send out, then your freezer becomes one of the factors which can limit it.
It is one of the deciding factors. And you're right that we might sort of design, actually the whole design has to be based on what is it that we are aiming to do. What is the consumption, what is the quantities, what is our target, what do we want to do. So if you want to do 1,000 units in a day, you should have storage for at least 1,500. It's very simple. But if you plan to do 1,000 and you have storage for 500, then you're stuck because you better be shipping out stuff at least 2 times a day or 3 times a day. And that is also possible. So if your design is that you're going to be shipping stuff out every 4 or 5 hours, fine, you can have a smaller freezer and a plastic freezer where you can pull it down, stuff the freezer or the chiller. It all depends on what is it that you want to do. It's like asking what is the ratio of the confectionery and the bakery, what is the size of the oven. It all depends on what you want to do. So this is a very, very generic design. Ghar mein 2 bedrooms, 1 living room. What is the ratio of the one to the other. It all depends on what you want to do in that space. What is you as an organization or as a business, what are you aiming for? So there is no thumb rule.
Sir, my question was, if you are making 1,000 cake a day, what should be the ratio? What should be the approximate size, square foot?
What's your size of the cake?
Say half, 1 kg.
1 kg. Yeah. So you want to know the area? That can be calculated. It's a very simple this thing. I can't just give you. That's a simple calculation. 1,000 cakes, 8-inch cakes. Do the maths. What is the surface area that is required to stock them? You need at least 12-inch clearance between actually more, because you need air circulation. So the freezer guy will be able to tell you exactly what is it that you need.
So the calculation is similar to how you calculate, how you put pallets inside a cold store. Like you have cakes are packed inside pallets or inside, containers, like 2 cakes in a pallet. In a single container. So each pallet will have 1 square meter pallet will have X number of cakes stacked up to this height, and therefore the total space available, just the floor space of your cold room. It's not that difficult a calculation, but remember that in any setup, the cold room is not just for 1,000 cakes. It's also for things which are work in progress. It's for things like
My thumb rule for this is 350 CFTs. 11% of your cold room space you can easily use. We did that calculation, these kind of calculations for many projects. They work out fine. 11% of liters is your kgs.
89% of visual space. 11%.
If you take liters of the total liters, take 11%, that's your kg. So this is working out to 350 CFT, which is very small cold room. Then more like a step-in, which is what will be required for this application.
But practically, it won't work out like that. If you just see one cake, let's say let's say a cake which is 10 centimeters wide, it's a half kg cake. Okay, he mentioned it's 10 centimeters in diameter by 10 centimeters in height. So that you can just imagine a box of 10 by 10 by 10. That is about 1,000 cubic centimeters. 1,000 cubic centimeter into 1,000 cakes. That's not 350 cubic square.
That's 1,000 liters.
1,000 liters.
Yeah.
So that's the calculation.
That's what. That's 1,000 liter of product. So I'm saying take 9,000 liters of refrigeration.
Okay. That might make more sense.
So you need to leave the passage. You need to leave the gaps. You have the unit.
Correct.
Indoor unit. So in the end you get this much. Only in case of emergency like a Diwali or a Christmas time, you fill it up more. Otherwise, day-to-day basis you use like that.
Typically, if you do something like this, practically speaking, in a 60 centimeter by 40 centimeter size tray, you can fit 4 cakes, and you can put 18 in one rack.
I can have a side discussion with Satish because he's an expert on cold rooms.
Okay.
Now, Satish, we designed Fairmont Hyderabad. Now, Fairmont being a Canadian chain, they were used to having like cold rooms of huge sizes, maybe the size of this hall. Like he made one for the Heritage Bakery. So but we made small cold rooms, like we make always. And they told us these are not enough, make them double. So we made them double happily. We had no problem. Then they said make it again double. This time we calculated. And then we checked and we did every calculation because we didn't want to be told later on that like you're nuts, you've done such big cold rooms for this hotel. So we calculated right to the garbage room. So we based it on the height model, like daily height. We checked how much food they were cooking, how much garbage was coming out. So we calculated and then we designed cold rooms because in garbage we stored less garbage cold room. So I can share it, all the data with you and you can give me your feedback and get further validated. It works beautifully till today. And we did that with Ajay Sumrani also because Ajay, with him we did a template for KFC and Pizza Hut. So there also we did similar calculations, but they load it more and because their incoming product in freezers is hard. So they use much more. But we still did calculations for dry storage and all that. So we can have a discussion.
Sir, actually, since chef was here and was about a bakery, I have good idea about the other product, but never had exposure on the bakery. So it's good to go to our design.
The ratio.
Design by somebody else. So that's why I asked.
The density is the similar one. Density is similar. Once we did density check, Arjun is here. He has a base kitchen. He went to INA market and he, with a measuring jar, he put every product in the market, in INA market, and he checked the weight. So we have all the densities, and with that we worked out he did some calculations for his base kitchen in collaboration with Sodexo once. So that also, and you have your data, we have your data, so we can share.
So actually, for pastry, if you want to check density and you want like then water is a good example because water is like almost most pastries are 80 to 90% water, little bit of fat, some carbohydrate, some protein.
Yeah, but the aeration is there. There's a much more volume. That's the only thing.
That's true. Yeah.
Chef, so Sunil, just my humble opinion, for a bakery, and especially for stacking cakes and sponge, than a cold room, a roll-in, will it make more sense because you are avoiding crisscross movement of man and material, and you can stack it up till the roof, say 2 or 3 feet down the line, which can.
You mean like a roll-in rack?
Yeah, roll-in.
Yeah, that is perfect.
Roll-in fridges than a cold room per se, is because cold room is more for bulk things like a vegetable preparation or something like that, where there are huge crates of 40-50 kilos. Here it's more of tray stacking. Just my humble opinion. I don't know about.
If your chef, your cold room, you can have it probably with the meals.
No, of course, that's what we do. But what he is mentioning is actually what he mentions is also Mr. Sunil can elaborate. But there's something what it's called. This is also very commonly used in pastries that you have a whole wall of roll-in units. So you don't actually, but that becomes very expensive because you have separate. The thing with a cold room is it's far more cheaper to buy a cold room than to buy multiple roll-in units where you have multiple doors and multiple hardware and everything. That's all.
I know we can take this topic to whatever extent, but is it not energy efficient to have multiple roll-ins?
It's not energy efficient. Satish will let me out now. And tomorrow morning we have a discussion on refrigeration with all the experts, but it is not efficient. And may I know your name, please?
My name is Rajaram. I represent MJ Mark.
From?
I represent MJ Mark.
Okay.
We are a startup consulting firm.
Right. So we can discuss, but no, it doesn't work. And the reason is, one basic reason is that in a cold room, you have a big mass of product. Okay, so you have a huge amount of cooling inside. If you say like BTUs, you have huge amount of, we have removed so many BTUs from the product and it is lying inside. Now when you open and shut a cold room, the temperature doesn't change. It stays the same. It's like a surge vessel. But in a region, the temperature changes too much. So in your operations will become very difficult. The moment you open and shut your individual units, you will not have the temperature. So if you're storing cold room, can't be reaching.
You can just research Koma, KOMA. They make something what you're talking about. Very good units. They're not roll-in, but they're also very efficient. Very good units. I think you had a question.
Does every bakery require glass pieces?
No.
Glass pieces, we are getting bakery customers looking for glass pieces. What kind of cake they put into glass pieces?
See, blast freezer is a device that lowers the temperature from plus 90 to minus 18 in like 2 hours.
Why not every bakery shop get glass pieces?
See, it depends. You should ask the guy who asked you, why do you want a blast freezer? Then he'll be.
They freeze it.
No, there's no particular type of cake. They're basically trying to increase the shelf life of the product, because when you reduce the pull down time, you basically are taking the product out of the danger zone very quickly, and the longer you leave it in the danger zone, the more spoilage and the faster it will spoil. So if that particular organization, that business, is looking to sell or give a longer shelf life to the product, they are looking for a blast chiller, a blast freezer. So it is no particular type of cake or anything. It is basically trying to reduce the pull down time, take the food or the product out of the danger zone as quickly as possible. When that happens, you get a longer shelf life. So that is the basic answer to that. So there will be not just bakeries, there can be all types of organizations who will be looking for a blast chiller / blast chiller freezer, depending on what is it that they are, what product they're doing, what do they want to do with the product, where do they want to sell it, where they are sending it, what sort of shelf life they're looking at. So it's all about the end shelf life of the product. Yes, but this is a situation where you're looking at basically using the product in the next couple of days, max. Yes. You will. Unless you overload the freezer and go absolutely crazy, yeah, you will get it. Why not? It is just that any pastry product ideally is not more than 8 inches big. Most of them 6 inches, 8 inches. उससे ज़्यादा क्या होता है? No. It is basically the capacity of the unit. A blast chiller or freezer is a much higher capacity of cooling, and it does it much quicker. In this side of a freezer, it will take longer, and that's it. But the core will get frozen. I mean, just go put something inside your ghar ka freezer.
Right? And if it suits you, you can upgrade it. It's not that expensive, right? So the chocolate room is another unit, which is again no specialized equipment required there, but you can also become very specialized there. Then we have, that's it, and after that we have what is called the ice cream production area, which is not mentioned here, but actually what it has is a batch freezer, a pasteurizer, and a blast freezer for hardening the ice cream, after which it goes inside your regular freezer for storage. Okay, so we already covered that. These are some of the equipment which is used commonly in bakeries. There's a small mistake here. A rack oven and a rotary oven are very often. This is not actually, you have a rack oven and you have a rotary rack oven, and then you have a convection oven. The convection oven, the product does not rotate inside it. There is only airflow, forced airflow, something like a combi steamer without the steam. Then we have a bread slicer, weighing scale, spiral mixer, dough sheeter, dough divider, a twin arm spiral mixer, planetary mixer, water meter and chiller, proofer, retarder proofer, again under counter chiller, induction cooker, heating lamp was what chef was mentioning for sugar work, but this is it. Actually, there are many different models. Then you have this is not a planetary mixer. So example layouts, again, this depends on where you're going to do it and how you're going to set it up and what you're going to make, all that stuff. So I wouldn't put much time on this. This is all the equipment, which is small equipment. This will be utility thing. So again, utility is dependent on everything else. It's not something which is right. That's all for this presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.